Hey guys, welcome back to the channel McNallie Money, home of all things stock, investment, and personal finance related. Now for today's video, we're going to be providing an update on a company that we've talked about on the channel previously, actually a couple of times. The company name is HITI, and they just came out with impressive Q3 numbers and some big developments that we're going to talk about in this presentation. So in terms of video format today, you guys, we're going to go through the numbers, we're going to give an update on their investor deck, and then I'm going to talk about some of the reasons why I like HITI compared to other operators in the North American retail sector. Now we just put a video out this week on Nova, so very similar type of business model, but there are definitely some differences that we're going to cover in this video. Now before we get into it, you guys, please take a second to smash the like button. It's a huge help to both me and the channel. If you're not already subscribed, McNallie Money, feel free to do so. And let me know in the comment section below what you thought of HITI's earnings, how you think they stack up to the competition, and about their prospects moving forward. Now without further ado, let's get into today's video. Okay guys, so that's right. Today we're going to be providing an update on HITI, ticker symbol HITI on the Toronto Venture. This one also trades on the NASDAQ, you guys, under the same ticker symbol. Now this is a company that I'm personally invested in. This is one of my favorite plays in the MJ space in terms of retail exposure because of the opportunity they have in the United States. And we're going to talk about that later in the video here. But in addition to that, they also just came out with huge Q3 numbers, so I wanted to talk about their earnings. And it's very timely because we just talked about one of their competitors on the channel this week in our Nova video. Now as you can see, the market was a little shaken up by their earnings here. So this is as of close on September 15th. So a day after earnings came out, and you can see they were down 70 cents per share or about 7.4% on the session. Now in my opinion, that presents a great buying opportunity here, you guys, and I may be looking to add to my position in HITI based on this little pullback we're seeing. Now in terms of market cap here, you guys, based on this price action that we saw on the 15th, we're sitting right around $500 million or about $500 million. So it definitely is a little bit bigger than Nova. However, I think that is warranted based on that US e-commerce exposure that you're getting with HITI. Now in terms of the chart here, you guys, you can see they've been trading pretty much flat since the middle of April. So if we pull up a 6-month, you can see back on April 15th, they were trading at 885, so virtually exactly where they're trading now. However, if we zoom out to a 1 year, you can see that this was a $10 plus company flirting with $13 highs back in March of this year. So it definitely has pulled back quite substantially from those highs we saw industry-wide at the start of the year. And you're getting it for about a 33% discount, or roughly $4 per share less than you could have back in March. So first up here, you guys, is the big news. So Q3 results, you can see the headline here, 99% increase in revenue and 6th consecutive quarter of positive adjusted EBITDA. So obviously the team at HITI is super excited about these numbers. And if we scroll down into the highlights, there's a couple things I specifically wanted to call out. So revenue, as mentioned, went up nearly 100% compared to Q3 of last year and came in just north of $48 million. So again, for reference, Nova came in at $30 million for their Q2 results, and that was compared to $24.1 million for HITI in the same quarter of last year. So basically doubled revenue year over year, which is phenomenal. Now that being said, Q3 is when we really start to see the impact of a lot of HITI's merger acquisition activity. So these financial results include the acquisition of Meta Growth, which took place on November 18th, Smoke Cartel on March 24th, Fab Nutrition on May 10th, and DHC Supply on July 6th. And these are actually some of the e-commerce platforms that I'm going to talk about later in the presentation. Second point here, their Canna Cabana Club membership program has grown by 45% to just north of 220,000 users. Gross profit increased by 75% to just shy of $17 million compared to 9.5 in Q3 of last year. And if you do the math on that, you can see that gross profit margin as a percentage actually did decline slightly to 35% compared to 40% last year. So they are starting to see a little bit of margin compression, which again is expected in this highly competitive retail space and honestly 35% is a little bit more in line with what we're seeing from the competition anyhow, so the 40 was quite rich last year. Next point here is on adjusted EBITDA, which came in at $1.5 million. So this was actually down year over year from 3.4 in Q3 of last year. Now we're seeing this with a lot of these companies, but a big portion of this, or a big reason for this, was actually the one-time listing expenses related to their NASDAQ uplist. So I personally would expect this trend to reverse here in Q4. And again, we've talked about this with a number of these smaller companies. When they start to graduate to these more senior exchanges, there are unfortunately expenses that come along with that. Now these next couple points that break down the revenue are really what's important for me as an investor in High Tide, and why I prefer this play over some of the competitors like Fire and Flower or Nova. So you can see geographically in terms of revenue breakdown, you guys, 38.4 million was earned in Canada here, while just under 10 million actually came from the United States. Now, I personally think the US presents a huge market opportunity for MJ. I think we're going to see federal legalization within the next 18 to 24 months, and this is going to be a massive opportunity for any of these companies that already have exposure to the US. So that 9.6 million is super important for me as an investor, and you can see that's up from 5.7 million in Q2 of 2021. So a 69% sequential quarter over quarter growth, which is phenomenal and a direct reflection of some of those new e-commerce platforms that they're starting to add to their portfolio. Now, similar to what we've seen in previous quarters here, you guys, almost all of their revenue was generated by the retail segment. They had an additional 1.8 million from wholesale and really nothing material from their corporate side. So this really is as close as you can get to a pure play on retail within the MJ industry. And the final point here, you guys, is in relation to cash. So they're currently sitting on $26.6 million, which is very healthy considering the market cap that we're talking about with High Tide. So for me personally, the earnings were very impressive here, you guys. Huge top line growth. We saw great sequential growth in the United States. We saw them start to fold in some of their acquisitions. So I think the only real negative I saw here, you guys, was that gross margin compression from 40 to 35%. But again, that's really more in line with what we're seeing within the industry. And I'm not too concerned as long as that number does not continue to decline quarter over quarter. So now we're going to jump over to the High Tide website. We're going to take a look at their updated investor presentation. Now, before we do, for those of you who've missed my previous videos on High Tide, I would definitely encourage you to take a look. But this is their website here. And I wanted to give a quick high-level summary of what the company's about. So they've been around for over a decade in the MJ industry. They've positioned themselves as a leading enterprise across Canada, Europe, and the United States. So again, that's the key differentiator for me compared to some of these others in the retail sector. Founded in 2019, our portfolio of companies include a dominant Canadian MJ retail chain, a global manufacturer and distributor of cutting-edge consumption accessories, and 3 out of 5 of the most popular accessory e-commerce platforms in the entire world. And between these platforms, High Tide saw nearly 100 million site visits in 2020. They've spent the last decade developing an intimate understanding of the MJ consumer and a suite of retail experiences to serve their interests, uniquely positioning High Tide for international expansion through emerging legal markets. So again, a couple things that stand out to me as an investor here, you guys. Big exposure to the US. You're also getting some exposure to Europe. They're planning to expand into other countries across the planet here. And that very robust, very high traffic e-commerce exposure. Now we are seeing a lot of MJ sales actually taking place in brick and mortar. However, I expect that trend to change to online, as we're seeing with a lot of other consumer products, as people become more and more familiar with these brands, the products, and the fad of legalized MJ starts to wear off. So this slide here does a really good job of showing the company from a very high level. So you can see market cap sitting right around that $500 million mark. This is when the share price was slightly higher. They've got just north of 900 employees, so almost hitting that 1,000 employee milestone. They're listed on both the Venture and the NASDAQ under the same ticker symbol, HITI. So one of the first MJ companies to be listed on the NASDAQ, which gives great exposure to US investment. And then on the right here, you can see some impressive numbers out of their retail segment. So 93 Canna Cabana branded stores, so slightly bigger than Nova. They're the owner of GrassCity.com, which is the world's biggest online head shop. Smoke Cartel, which is a US head shop, Smoke Cartel, which is a US focused head shop, Daily High Club, again US focused head shop and subscriptions, Dankstop, US online head shop, Fab CBD, which is one of the leading online CBD retailers in the US, and CBD City, which again is a CBD based e-commerce platform. So a great portfolio of websites that combined give them that exposure to the US and internationally that you're not getting with some of these other players in the retail space. Now on the wholesale side of things, again, keep in mind this represents a very small percentage of their revenue. They've got the Valiant and Famous brands, which together design, manufacture, and distribute proprietary and licensed consumption accessories featuring over 5,000 different SKUs. So this really is just a little bonus here, you guys. As an investor in High Tide, I do see growth in this segment in the future years, but as of right now, again, it doesn't represent a meaningful amount of revenue for this company. And the bottom point here, you guys, talks about their strategic investment. So similar to what we saw with Alcana and Nova, Tilray and Aurora are both invested in High Tide, which gives them some of that stability and access to knowledge or expertise within the MJ industry. So this slide here really talks about those business assets or business units that we talked about on the last slide and lays it out in a very easy to consume format. So you can see under the brick and mortar retail banner, we've got the Canna Cabana brand. These are these 93 recreational MJ stores we just talked about. Now we're going to talk about a new brand that they're coming to market with that focuses on the value or discount segment of the market in a second here. But as of right now, they're all branded under Canna Cabana. They've got their online presence, so focused on two categories right now. One, accessories, and secondly, CBD. So we talked about the different assets there. And then under the wholesale division, Valiant Distribution and Famous Brands. So now that we've talked about their earnings, we've looked at their portfolio of different assets, I wanted to talk about why I'm so bullish on High Tide as a retailer compared to some of these other operators. Now this slide's super important because I think a lot of people, including myself, were a little hesitant to get involved in the retail space because they were worried about that gross margin compression that we actually saw in Q3 from High Tide. Now this is something I've talked about on the channel at lengths, you guys, in terms of the actual producers or LPs within the MJ space. And High Tide does a really good job of addressing this front and center in their investor presentation and calling out that the problems LPs or licensed producers are starting to see are not related to retailers and actually work to their benefit. So now that MJ has been legalized for quite some time here in Canada, many of these LPs are now facing issues with excessive supply, which is causing them to write down inventory, shut facilities, and actually record impairments or negative EBITDA. And this is actually one of the reasons I just got out of WeedMD or Entourage Health. They used to do a massive outdoor grow. They actually cut that down this year. They didn't do it anymore. And the reason for that, you guys, is they just weren't able to move that much inventory. And obviously when you have excessive supply, the prices go down, and that's what's causing the stress on the LP segment of this market. Now that being said, retailers can often benefit from these issues because as there's more and more price competition, that'll actually bring the cost of a lot of the products that they feature in their stores down, and that's going to lead to revenue growth, positive EBITDA, and minimal capital requirements for these locations. So I did want to call that out specifically. Although I'm super bullish on the MJ industry holistically, there are segments of it, like the grower, cultivator, producer side, that I do want to stay away from, you guys, and I do want to limit my exposure to. So I think High Tide is a way to get around that. And again, as long as we see those gross margins plateau at around 30-35%, I think we're in a pretty safe spot here as investors. Now this slide here shows a quick snapshot of what the Canna Cabana experience actually looks like. So this is their one-stop MJ shop. You can see super bright open concept in here. What I wanted to call your attention to on this slide is actually the provincial breakdown of these 93 locations. So we saw with Nova, they're really making a push into Ontario. They're headquartered in Edmonton, so their focus has really been in Alberta, and that's really the same story here with High Tide. So almost 2/3 of their locations are in Alberta. They have 23 in Ontario, a couple in Manitoba, a couple in Saskatchewan. So they are looking to expand this up close to 200 stores over the next couple of years. But it was interesting to me that the provincial distribution looked very similar between the two companies. And I think this is a direct reflection of how the different provinces handled their MJ rollout over the last couple of years. Now, keeping in that theme here, you guys, another similarity that I'm starting to see with High Tide versus someone like a Nova is really this focus on a value brand or value chain within their company. So this is the final piece of news I wanted to talk about in this presentation. This came out on the 14th, so Tuesday this week, and High Tide has actually announced that they've completed the design process for their new concept of store, which is going to be branded under the MJ Chop Club banner. And this is exactly what we saw with the Nova presentation here, you guys, is they're starting to convert their stores to the Value Buds chain. And as they're doing that, they're seeing exponentially more revenue from each and every location. And I think that concept is exactly what High Tide's trying to emulate here, you guys. So I see this as a big opportunity for High Tide and a potential challenge or issue for some of the discount banners like Nova. Now, they haven't released a ton of details and these are not up and operational yet, but you can see here the MJ Chop Club banner and a few of the highlights. So these are really going to focus on small square footage locations, so about 1,000 to 1,200 square feet. So about half of what we're seeing with the Canna Cabana locations. The estimated build out cost is going to be substantially lower, so about 125 to 150K versus 260 to 350 for a Canna Cabana store, so they can put up more of these for the same overall cost. They're going to have a differentiated assortment of products that are really tailored or focused on that value sensitive demographic. And again, in the Nova presentation, you guys, we saw that that represents a huge portion of the overall MJ market. And that's exactly what we see here in the comments from Raj Grover, who's the CEO of High Tide. Over the past 6 months, it has become clear to us that the value-focused consumers represent a very meaningful consumer segment in the Canadian MJ retail landscape. So again, exactly what we just said. Our upcoming move to specifically service the value segment is designed to increase market share and lure customers away from the illicit market, which although is declining, still represents a significant share of the total MJ sales nationally. So I'm super excited to see how they execute on this idea, you guys, and I think they are going to be able to steal market share from some of these other competitors in the value space over the next couple of quarters here. Now, that being said, it is going to be a fine line. Obviously, if you're selling products at lower prices, you're going to have lower margins. So it's going to be interesting to see how low these companies push each other and where prices and margin percentages actually start to bottom out within this industry. So to close things out here, you guys, I thought this slide was very fitting. It really talks about High Tide's big accomplishments so far in 2021. And these are really some of the main reasons that I'm so excited as an investor in this company. So number of stores has grown from 67 to 93. The long-term target here is 200, so exact same as we saw with Nova. Trailing revenue increased from 70 million to 152. Their US revenue run rate is up from 22 million to 50 million, which for me is the main selling point here, you guys. Their balance sheet has increased up to that $27 million of cash we saw. They cut their debt in half, so they paid off substantial amount of debt. They're down from 72 million to 28 million, with only 1.6 million of this debt that actually matures in the next 12-month period. They had a major uplist from the CSE to the Toronto Venture in Canada. They uplisted from the OTC to the NASDAQ in the US. And as a result of all of this great activity, their market cap and share price are up substantially, so 112 million to 514 in terms of market cap, and share price has jumped up from 383 to 975. Now we have pulled back a little bit. Again, we're sitting at 949 as of close on the 15th, but I definitely think High Tide is moving in the right direction here, you guys. I was super impressed with these earnings. Huge top line revenue growth. They're starting to fold in a lot of these accretive acquisitions. You get that exposure to e-commerce, you get that exposure to the US and some international opportunities. And for me, I think this is a great long-term play on the retail space within the MJ industry, and I'm planning on holding this one for years to come. So that's it for today's video. Thanks so much for watching, you guys. Make sure you leave a comment in the section below. Let me know what you thought of their earnings, how you think High Tide stacks up to some of the others in this space, and if you personally are holding any shares of this company. Now, in addition to that, you guys, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, McNallie Money, make sure you do so. And if you're still watching at this point, hopefully you found some value in the video, so make sure you smash the like button. It really does help me out in a big way. On a final note, thanks so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.